All right, so it is telling me that we are now live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to After Scientology Straight Up and Vertical, the live edition. Let me make sure. There we are. Looks like we are good in terms of sound and video and everything. Always a little nerve-wracking going live. We're doing that this week because Tony Ortega, my usual partner in crime on this show, is out on a little, holiday vacation, whatever, and is beyond internet capability for us to record yesterday or today. So I thought that since I was gone last weekend and we didn't do a show, I didn't want to deny you all a Scientology news update for 2 weeks in a row. So I thought, I'm going to put this together, and rather than pre-record it, I might bumble around a little bit here live, going through some of the stories and whatnot, but I thought I'd offer you some commentary on some of what Tony has posted over the last 2 weeks on his Substack. I probably should have thrown the link to it up here on the screen, but after the show, I'll edit the description section below so you can have a link to Tony's Substack and go to it. And as I always promote every week, you can go subscribe to his Substack, get your daily notifications, and then check back in with us on Mondays for the update. And yes, I am wearing weather-appropriate shirt attire here for Denver, Colorado. It is scorching today, something like, let me check here where we're at right now, but it's something on the order of, 90 degrees right now. And it's supposed to get even hotter today. So hopefully it'll cool down on the rest of the week, but let's see. So let's go ahead and get into the news. There's a lot of stuff to cover, actually. Some fun, some interesting stuff that's been happening over the last 2 weeks. So let's start with OT phenomena. Now, this is always fun because Scientology promotes success stories and testimonials from people who are Scientologists. How do they talk to each other? How do they think about the experience of Scientology and what it's giving to them? Why pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars to a church / business corporation, right? For these superpowers, these super abilities, you're supposed to be rehabilitating yourself spiritually. Well, what do you get from that? Well, Tony published some fun stuff that I thought I would share. A couple of these I would share with you, because if this is what I was getting for hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of investment, I might start questioning the wisdom of that investment. But here's what Scientologists say about what Scientology is doing for them. Here we have, of course, the magically found item. I couldn't find the pen for my tablet, even though I was sure I'd put it in my bag. I searched my apartment thoroughly. It was gone. But I made a postulate, self-determined decision, postulate in Scientology. I made a postulate, nothing gets lost. So I stopped stressing and went to bed. The next morning, I walked into the living room, and there was my pen. It was sitting neatly on the table, a place I had searched several times. I live alone, and no one could have moved it, and yet there it was. It was pure magic. I just can't help but think that this is reminiscent of praying for your football team to win, or something so silly. If your postulates, your prayers, if your intention is so strong that you can literally materialize a pen, like this is the apparent belief here. It wasn't there, and I went to bed, and then it was there. It was magic. Why not postulate $10 million showing up on your table, right? I mean, come on. Yeah, getting a parking spot in New York City, that's right. So the goofiness is a bit much for me with things like this. And this is about the level of where a lot of Scientologists are at as to how they think their OT powers manifest in real life is things just appear, you know, because they literally didn't see it the night before, because, you know, perception is not objective reality, in case you, didn't know. Now, there was another one here, which, oh boy. Okay, so this is now communing with the dead. About a week after my father's burial, I went back to the cemetery to visit his grave. I noticed he was still around, and he seemed very unhappy. I contacted him and asked what was on his mind. She just contacted her dead father at the cemetery, no big deal. He said he had an unresolved situation with my mother, but he didn't know how to handle it as she had already passed. I acknowledged him and directed him to get in calm with her in communication. Suddenly, I could also perceive her presence and their communication about the situation. So I guess it just didn't occur to her dead father's spirit that now that he was passed on and had shed his mortal coil and was no longer pushing up the daisies, or was now pushing up the daisies rather, that maybe he could talk to his dead wife, who is also somehow around in the spiritual plane. But he needed his OT alive daughter to remind him that he could communicate with his wife. And so suddenly she manifests, and the wife assured him all was fine and that he didn't have to worry any longer. They were then able to happily go their own ways. Okay, so just thought I'd share a little bit of, there's some other ones in the article you can check with Tony, on Tony's Substack on, but this is the quality and tenor of the successes and OT phenomena that occurs within Scientology. Remember, these are people who are paying hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to attain these high spiritual states of awareness so that they can find their pens and talk with their dead relatives. It's kind of sad, isn't it? Okay, let's move on. Now, our next story comes from the UK, and this is Scientology is denied permit after claiming temporary IAS tent is a permanent structure. Now, every year in the UK at St. Hill Manor, they do the International Association of Scientologists yearly membership event where they have a bunch of folks come together and they give some awards and they talk about progress from, you know, the funding that the International Association of Scientologists gets and where some of that money goes, sort of. And Miscavige gets to pontificate from the stage about how great everything is and how the numbers have never been higher and everything is going great, and don't ask any questions because it's all so wonderful, don't you understand? So this is the IAS event, and it happens in a great big tent that they erect on the grounds of St. Hill every year. And they do a big dinner, and it's a big, you know, to-do kind of event. And apparently, in order to do this kind of thing, you need permitting and you need to get okay from the local government authorities. And so according to some reporting here from Alexander Barnes-Ross, our man in the UK, who is doing some really championship activism over there, fighting the good fight against Scientology. So he writes that St. Hill suffered, I'm not going to read you the whole story, but just some highlights here. St. Hill suffered another blow today as Mid-Sussex District Council refused their application for a lawful development certificate for the erection of their large marquee used to host the annual IAS event. So they didn't get okay for the application to put up their big tent. So apparently the IAS circus isn't going to be happening, at least not with as a permitted, approved activity. it'll be interesting to see what Scientology does with this. Last year, the council issued a notice warning Scientology that they must apply for a planning permission in order to build the 45,000 square foot marquee on the grounds of St. Hill to host the event. But instead, the church lawyer, this guy named Peter Hogan, submitted an application for this lawful development certificate, arguing that they had been using this tent for the last 10 years, so it should be exempt from this, from these building regulations. And that application was refused. With the council noting that the marquee is only in place temporarily, and there was no event for 4 years over the pandemic. And they also pointed out Scientology's lack of consistency in their claims. Quote, the erection of the marquee is said to take several weeks, and dismantling and restoration takes about a month. The use of the marquee, and therefore we assume the field that it sits in, occurs for approximately 1 week. So they do all this work to keep this thing up for a week. Elsewhere, the application says the event lasts for 3-5 days. There's a lack of consistency and precision in the application documents about the duration of the use of the field during the annual event. And then the photos weren't specific enough, and they are probably going to end up appealing this decision. But this is now interesting to me because it's pushback against Scientology, finally, over in the UK, against what they have basically been taking for granted, Scientology has, in just doing whatever they want to do. And I don't know if memory serves here, Scientology plays a little fast and loose with applications, permits, and the legal requirements for their property. I remember a few years ago, I believe they had chopped down a tree they weren't supposed to chop down. And the IAS event is something that Miscavige is not keen to schedule well in advance, because he doesn't want folks like Alex and protesters and us ex-members and victims of Scientology to nail down where Miscavige is going to be when. One of the biggest, I'll just share this with you guys, one of the biggest security breaches that you can commit in Scientology is to let people know where David Miscavige is going to be. Now, obviously, when they have certain events like the New Year's event, that they plan for the event, and that's where he's going to be for that time that he's on the stage. But outside of his stage time, his whereabouts and location and schedule and itinerary are super, super confidential in Scientology, and it's just none of your damn business if you ask about it. I did once, and I found out the hard way that that's just not how that works. That this is a very, very hush-hush confidential thing. And there are layers of Miscavige's security. There are Sea Org members who are assigned to a security detail for him in different locations when he goes to places. And then he has private security that he pays for as well. The professional ex-special forces guys and stuff, I guess, right? He pays the big bucks for that. So that's one of the considerations as to why they don't nail down the dates until the last possible moment. And this creates a tremendous amount of inconvenience for Scientologists too. Not that we all particularly care about that, but it is a thing that, sometimes Scientologists, and these are bigwig Scientologists who go to these events, they don't know when the event's happening until like a week before. They might get some kind of ballpark of, well, we know it's going to be, here, and we know it's going to be around this time, but when exactly, and is it really going to happen, or is something going to, get in the way? Who knows? So that's kind of interesting. And again, also, yeah, I'll just read you a little bit more on this from Tony when he wrote, did Scientology really think it was going to get away with the notion that a giant tent it puts up and takes down every year was somehow a permanent structure that deserved to be grandfathered in and wouldn't need a permit? Yeah, they really did think that. We loved the touch, Tony writes here, that they submitted photos from past years to suggest that the marquee has always been there and always will be. How Orwellian. And it's not surprising that the district council didn't buy it. Clearly, it's a temporary structure and they're going to need proper permitting. So we'll see if they pull that off. And it'll be interesting to see what Miscavige would do in the face of not having government okay to hold his event. I would imagine he would do it anyway. But, you know, this is remember that this district council, these are the folks, if I have this right, these are the folks who just spent an enormous amount of taxpayer money to do this full-on investigation of whether the protests that Alex Barnes-Ross does and organizes there, whether those protests should be allowed to continue or not. And of course, he got the green light. But that whole investigation and process was an expensive thing to do. And then Scientology basically tried to pull the plug at the end. And the district council was like, yeah, no, we're not going to pull the plug on this. And they finished the investigation and its recommendations, not appreciating that Scientology was not really playing ball or cooperating as much as they could or should have. So, so interesting stuff going on across the pond, and all basically happening, interestingly, because of Alex's work over there. I'll put that out there. So, anyway, good on them. Yes, exactly. No, they do not. Just looking at the comments here, I don't think it was any part of the permitting process or application to talk about the fact that this is a great big fundraiser. I mean, it's the IAS event. I should have also, of course, mentioned that this is a huge money-making opportunity for Scientology every year, because all the bigwigs, including sometimes, often, Tom Cruise will even show up flying in on his helicopter, as I think he did last year. So, interesting stuff. All right, now let us move on to this man. John Alex Wood. Now, if y'all have some memories of Twitter and Scientology battles or trolls or feuds that go on social media, then you will remember this guy. John Alex Wood is not a Sea Org member. He's not a staff member. He's a public Scientologist who took it upon himself to volunteer for OSA, the Office of Special Affairs, and engage fully and for hours and hours and hours a day as an online pro-Scientology troll, taking on us critics and victims of Scientology. And he was happy to do so. He was jovial, in fact, often in his challenges and trolling. He became, as Tony writes here, main online attack dog for Scientology, fighting daily at places like Twitter over allegations about the church's abuses. He became a bit of a legend at the underground bunker for the way he clashed online under his own name day after day. He would bring it. He also amusingly revealed that he was a huge Monty Python fan, and of course, so am I, and so are, I'm sure, many of you. But Eric Idle heard about this and actually went out of his way to tell him to buzz off. It really happened. And Tony even met John at one point. But the news story here is what blew us away is that, okay, so I said he wasn't a staff member, a Sea Org member. Now, he was in charge of the UK Narconon back in 1994, 30 years ago. He was the executive director there. So he was in charge of one of their front group operations for a period of time. And Narconon is their drug rehab, drug detox program in which people have died at, and which is not a great program because it uses a lot of Hubbard's pseudoscientific nonsense, like the sauna detox and the TRs, where you're trained to stare at people for hours on end and stuff like that. So it was interesting to me to see that this man has just put out a success story at St. Hill of having gone through and now standing at the gateway to being able to do the OT levels. All this time, he's not been OT. And apparently, reading between the lines here in his success story, he says that he recently had to do a bunch of Scientology training in order to get the qualification to get onto the OT levels. If you guys don't know that what his, there's a, another photo of him I probably should have posted here of him holding up his certificate for what's called the Advanced Courses Preparations, or what we used to call OT Preps. And that's the actions you need to take in order to prepare you to do the OT levels. It's auditing stuff that you do in Scientology. It's usually security checking and case repair and stuff like that. And it can also involve training steps that you're required to do before they're going to let you onto the OT levels. And John was made to do the professional TRs course, which is the one where you have to sit for 2 straight hours in a chair and confront a person in front of you flawlessly. No cracking up, no laughing, no tears, no blinking, no nonsense. 2 straight hours, and they time it. And it will take you far, far, far longer than that 2-hour block to get the 2-hour time done. You're going to be at it for hours and hours because you're going to mess up lots and lots of times. I used to train people on this, and I, of course, did it myself as a Scientologist. Well, he had not done that. And it was interesting to me that this guy could be the ED of a Narcanon and not be trained on TRs, not be trained on the E-meter, bunch of stuff he had to do training on in order to get to this position. So his success story here says just a couple things here. He said he started the communications course at St. Hill as his very first course back in the day. And he learned about the OT levels by reading the OT phenomena that we just went over, and dreaming about going OT myself. I guess John had a hard time finding his keys and pens also. So he was anxious to get onto the OT levels, which he still hasn't done, by the way. This is just the preparatory step to getting there. So for that reason, I always knew I was going to go OT at St. Hill one day, and I am now standing at the threshold of that postulate. So he says he had to do Pro-TRs and upper end doc and the metering course, and he says my communication level and confront level moved to a whole new dimension. Yeah. Got to wonder about that. All my life, I've dreamed of going OT, and having just attested to my OT eligibility, that dream is about to come true. So, so here we go. And he says, he says the adventure of R6EW, the clearing course, and the OT levels await. Oh, well, that's interesting, because that means that John Alex Wood is not actually clear yet. There's an alternate route. I'll just go over this very quickly. But when you go up the bridge in Scientology, you attain this point called the state of clear. And you're supposed to get there by doing this lower level auditing. And then you go clear, and then you go on to your OT levels. But some people do that lower level auditing, and they don't go clear, and they have to do what's called the alternate route to clear, and they have to audit themselves in a room by themselves with the meter, just like the OT levels are done. That's how they get themselves to clear. And the services that do that are called R6EW. Don't worry about it. It doesn't mean anything. And the clearing course. And these can take months to do solo auditing to get rid of your, reactive mind, which of course we all know doesn't exist. So, so that's John Alex Wood. lower level champion of Scientology justice, who is now about to find out all about how he has been mucking up his own reactive mind all these years. And then he gets to find out about Xenu and the body thetans. Oh boy, does John have a path ahead of him. I feel sad for that man to have invested all that time, all that energy for such a waste, fantastical waste of time and money. But what are you going to do? All right, now moving right along, I wanted to talk briefly about this story, and this has to do with the passing of Hulk Hogan, the WWE wrestling phenomenon, or whatever you want to think about him as. And there have been some very colorful statements made online about Hulk Hogan since his death. I think he had a heart attack at age 71 last week. And this write-up, I really encourage you guys to check this article out because it's written by Luke Thompson, who is a movie critic, professional critic, and he's somebody I follow on Blue Sky. You can find him online. And I thought that this article, the main reason I wanted to bring this up today is because I thought this was one of the best pieces about Hulk Hogan and his passing on the internet. I've not seen anything that was as good as what he wrote here. And this connects with Scientology, by the way, because Hulk Hogan, in his later years, was married to a woman named Sky Daly, who is a Scientologist. And he was living down in Clearwater. And he was not, as I understand it, a Scientologist himself. He didn't convert. I think he was a Christian or Catholic of some kind, if he had any, religious leanings at all. They were in that direction. I don't think he ever actually became a Scientologist, but he married one. So that's a little bit of the connection there. And there was, I just want to give you a little sample of some of the writing of Luke Thompson here. Just a couple points. Yeah, Hogan, he talks a lot about his wrestling experience, and he says, Hogan likely mitigated a lot of the extra wear and tear by developing a simple, crowd-pleasing style that enabled him to rest for most of the match. He'd come out, guns a-blazing, the bad guy would halt his momentum with a cheap shot and then spend the next 10 minutes or so beating Hogan up. And right as the villain seemed about to win, Hogan would draw in the crowd's cheers like Popeye eating spinach, powering up to indestructible mode, impervious to pain. Once the villain realized his assault was now useless, Hogan would kick him in the face and do a leg drop to end the match, then spend almost as long doing bodybuilder poses after the match as he had spent wrestling. And that was kind of his shtick as he went on up the line. But he also connects this to Vince McMahon and the WWE. And he writes here about how there was actually a separation where Hulk Hogan kind of went off and did this other league thing for a while and then ended up coming back after severing ties with McMahon over steroid use, which would seem to be the most obvious thing about Hulk Hogan. But then he came back around. And he writes here, just in a little interesting marriage of wrestling and politics, which I found absolutely fascinating. He talks about Trump, and he says here that once Hulk Hogan endorsed Trump in 2024, especially at the infamous MSG rally, it seemed to confirm his bigotry, and when he last appeared on the WWE TV, he was soundly booed out of the building. That's interesting. I did not know that. And Trump, incidentally, is almost as much a product of Vince McMahon as Roy Cohn. Cohn trained Trump in ruthless business and politics, but McMahon was grooming Trump for TV from the very beginning. WrestleMania 4 and 5 were promoted as Trump-branded venues back in 88 and 89, and Trump appeared on WWE TV shows over the years as a caricature of himself. Back then, it was Hogan who used makeup to make himself look orange, had thinning blonde hair, spoke gibberish to enraptured audiences about how he was going to destroy foreign invaders, and was a not-so-secret racist and compulsive liar. And he kept it working for decades, perhaps because audiences knew the sport was a show and assumed the persona was too. McMahon is now disgraced by sex scandals, Hogan is dead, and Trump is president, with McMahon's wife as his Secretary of Education. Just a nice little encapsulation of those relationships and where people went with them. So anyway, wanted to kind of throw that out there for y'all as something to check out on Tony's blog. Okay, so now let's yeah, let me share one more paragraph with you. Hogan may be as narcissistic as Tom Cruise, but it's hard to imagine him believing that L. Ron Hubbard or anyone else ever was a greater human being than Hulk Hogan. There we go. That's what I wanted to end on. All right, now this next one is really good. And I really encourage you, because this is a long article that Tony posted on July 21st. This was Leah Remini wrote an article for the Underground Bunker. Leaked Scientology policies direct lawyers in religious warfare. There are way, way too many points being made in this article for me to easily summarize them for you today. But I really, really encourage you to go check this out. Because, well, let me just give you the beginning, and then we'll go over a couple points that she makes in this. Newly uncovered policies and confidential intelligence documents reveal that Scientology not only runs its litigation by internal church doctrine, but it also requires every attorney, including non-Scientologists, to follow religious orders issued by founder L. Ron Hubbard himself. This means civil and criminal courts, without realizing it, are being manipulated by a religious command structure that uses attorneys to suppress victims, destroy whistleblowers, and stall justice by any means. These are not isolated incidents. They are the result of permanent, unchangeable religious policies enforced by Scientology's Intelligence Division, the Office of Special Affairs. And the IRS, the federal government, and the California Bar have done nothing about it. Now, she makes the point in this article that all of these internal documents and confidential points that she's quoting from, meaning confidential church documents, they're not, we can look at them, but internally within Scientology, I, as a Scientologist, never saw any of this. This is all super, super hush-hush stuff inside Scientology. But all of this in 2010 was turned over to the FBI by Mike Rinder. So they've had this for 15 years. They've had the information of how Scientology actually dictates to its lawyers, Scientologists who are lawyers and non-Scientologists that they hire who are lawyers, both get the same sets of instructions and demands of how to carry out what Scientology frames and thinks about as warfare. It's not a legal suit or a legal defense. It's warfare. And Hubbard often would bring in Sun Tzu, Art of War, and quote from Clausewitz, who was an old German guy who wrote about war. If you know, you know. I'm just kind of giving the broad strokes here, but the point that Leah makes here, one of the key points that she makes, is that Scientology doctrine cannot be changed even if it violates the law. These policies are considered religious commandments and are enforced as such. And she quotes from a number of policies and even defines various issue types and how each of these issues and bulletins and things like guardian's office orders and advices and orders of the day and flag orders and professional auditors bulletins. All of these are different issue types within Scientology. They don't just have writings from Hubbard. They have writings under different formats and different sectors or areas where these things apply. And there are various of these that apply in the legal arena. And each of these is treated, as Leah writes here, as canonical religious law. She talks here about fair game, for example, and how it may no longer appear in policy titles, but the structure, enforcement, and logic of it remains intact, repackaged through euphemisms. There are also a section here on the role of Scientology policies in litigation. As I mentioned, Scientology considers litigation not as a civil process, but as war. Just scrolling down to this next section here, where she quotes from the fair game policy and makes the point, I think a good one, that this religious status of being labeled fair game, which comes from an issue called Penalties for Lower Conditions back in 1967, this religious status is triggered not by violence or fraud, but by acts like suing Scientology, reporting crimes to law enforcement, speaking publicly about abuse, or leaving the church and telling others. Those are the crimes you commit in Scientology to be labeled as fair game, and that allows Scientologists to do whatever they want to you, go through your garbage, hire private investigators to follow you, stalk you, harass you, threaten your life. This is par for the course for Scientology, and it all falls under this nonsense of fair game. Now, we've all known about fair game for quite some time, but let me go down here to this secret litigation dashboard. They actually keep statistics based on whether somebody is an unhandled attacker. They have a whole point system for how they keep their statistics in OSA. And it's like, for example, if a local suit is filed, that's 20 points. But if an international media story happens, that's 100 points. And that's why you'll see when I, for example, I'll just throw myself up as an example because it's the one I can talk about easiest. When I started my YouTube channel and was talking about Scientology and its abuses and its structures, the church basically didn't really do a lot about that because I was a local threat here in the local area and on YouTube to whatever degree I was being seen, but it wasn't seen as an international incident. When I went on to the Scientology in the Aftermath show, now suddenly, the day that show aired, now suddenly I was an international threat and 100 points, right? And that's what triggered the website being put out about me under the Aftermath website. So when you're wondering why, do they go after certain people and not go after other certain people, it's because of this point system and the statistics that they keep as to who's a threat and who is not. It actually gives you the whole rundown on that, which I think is kind of interesting. Now, as far as some of these quotes about lawsuits being war, here's a quote from a policy letter called Legal Principles, which I never saw when I was in Scientology. This was written by Hubbard. Quote, legal is a type of warfare, a warfare of better reasons, he says. The purpose of war is to bring about a more amenable frame of mind in the enemy. Interesting. So what we see here from this is that lawsuits are not seen as isolated threats. They're calculated, scored, and responded to with precision. Scientology lawyers are not just hired counsel, they are proxies executing strategic orders tied to religious outcomes. And staff promotions, demotions, and evaluations are based on how well they punish victims and suppress opposition, not on whether cases are won fairly. So there's a lot more in here. Oh, including some bit about arbitration. Here's another quote you may not have ever seen before. Quote, "If arbitration is an option, push for it aggressively. Never concede it's a church-run process." This confirms, as Leah writes here, what victims and whistleblowers have alleged for years. There is no real arbitration system for non-Scientologists. Victims are being funneled into a religious court-martial process known as a committee of evidence, which exists solely for disciplining Scientologists who want to return to Scientology and get back into good standing with Scientology. Courts are being deliberately misled, is the point. And she talks in some detail about a man named Gary Soder, who is one of Scientology's lawyers on the Valerie Haney arbitration case. And anyway, I will let you go ahead and read this. But she mentions here, amenable frame of mind is not a neutral legal term. It comes directly from Scientology doctrine, specifically a 1969 policy called battle tactics. There's a name for you. The end product of war, Hubbard writes, is to bring about a more amenable frame of mind on the part of the enemy. This can be done by making the person worry about what is going to happen to him. That's definitely what Scientology is all about when it comes to their arbitration process. It's an incredibly abusive system. There are many, many, many more quotes in this that I highly, highly recommend you check out by reading through the whole article. Leah really took some time to put this together, and it is very much worth your time to check out. So, so that is that article. All right, now moving right along, we have Isaac Hayes. Back in the news last week. His son, Isaac Hayes III, well, here's what Tony writes. Isaac Hayes III is getting a lot of attention today for repeating something he said years ago about how his father quit South Park. And of course, South Park has been in the news recently, hasn't it? But he's conveniently ignoring some new Scientology documents that contradict what he's saying. Last September, there was this story in the Daily Beast. New internal Scientology documents revealed that after the infamous Trapped in the Closet South Park episode from November 2005, Isaac Hayes was deeply offended and quit the show. Now, Chef, his character, was not in that episode, but it poked fun at Scientology, Tom Cruise, John Travolta, etc., and laid bare the whole Xenu story, which is not the whole of OT3, by the way. I'm going to continue to remind everybody of that because the Xenu part of that story is, to Scientologists, the least important part of OT3. It's the body thetans that are the actual important thing as far as Scientologists are concerned. But the world was astounded to learn about Xenu and his intergalactic genocide from 75 million years ago here on Earth, involving volcanoes and spaceships that look like DC-10s and atomic weapons, right? Crazy story. So according to a memo that Mike Rinder wrote on November 17th, the day after the episode aired, Mike told David Miscavige that Isaac Hayes, was furious that the show had aired. Quote, Isaac was briefed on the show when he arrived in LA at lunchtime. He was very pissed and said it explained why he hadn't been able to reach the creators of the show, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, over the last few days. Now, Mike did confirm that he did write that memo to Tony and that it was authentic. And according to the memo, Hayes agreed with his Scientology handlers that he needed to quit the show, but they decided to wait some time so as not to create a media incident. So a couple of months later, in January 2006, Hayes suffered a stroke, something that was revealed years later by his son, Isaac Hayes III. And he quit South Park March 16th, 2006. So Isaac Hayes III has said in the past that this memo was not written by his father and that someone quit the South Park gig on his behalf. So I will just refer you to the full article here to get all the details of this. But I wanted to put out the idea that perhaps both things could be true at the same time, that Isaac Hayes was actually very, very upset with the fact that the show had aired and that it had lampooned Scientology, but that maybe he didn't want to quit, but that Scientology kind of pushed him to, as his son is asserting. I think both things could possibly be true at the same time. And that's that story. Again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but I think that is food for thought, right, when it comes to that story. And now, finally, we come to our last story for this week, which is the Clearwater battle that is now kind of raging between the Church of Scientology, David Miscavige himself involved in this, and the Clearwater City Council, and efforts on the part of Church of Scientology to get ownership of a street that is right next to the Fort Harrison Hotel and the site of a event hall that they want to build so that they can do their events every year there in Clearwater in a building that they own outright. Not a tent, not the Shrine Auditorium, but their L. Ron Hubbard Hall. And they've had plans. This has been a fundraising activity for decades in Scientology. And I'm sure they have raised, probably 3 or 4 times the amount that it's actually going to cost, because that's Scientology's way when it comes to fundraising. And they're trying to get ownership of this street that would be right in front of this hall. And this has been going back and forth for quite some time now. And so now their latest move from Scientology was to go, okay, so you guys aren't going to sell it to us, and you're not giving us a free ride to just give you some money and take it. So now we're digging up this old information about how the street actually doesn't need to be sold. We actually are asserting that we have a right to have this property, that the street is not owned by Clearwater, and that we should just take it. And now the response from the Clearwater City Council is what Tony is reporting on this week. And he says here, last week we told you that in a letter from its attorney, Robert Potter, Scientology told the city of Clearwater that it already owns the roadbed under South Garden Avenue, the short downtown street that it wants the city to vacate. A 1992 map proves that Scientology owns it, Potter argued. And so when the church reapplies to have the right-of-way vacated, this time there would be no $1.3 million payment to the city, which the church had originally agreed to in the first go-round of this dance. And of course, Scientology pulled back its application once there was some resistance from another group, and the city council was going to vote to not approve it. Scientology went, no, and tried to, have a takes backsies, and so now, and then put this letter to the council saying, well, we don't have to pay you anyway. So what does the city have to say for itself? Well, in its reply, City Attorney David Margolis suggests that Scientology is glossing over some things that can't be ignored, and that its claim of ownership on the roadbed is dubious at best. And without reading the entire kind of boring responses. I'll just simply say that Margolis ends the letter with this, quote, "I hope that clarification, in addition to the questions I asked above, will help us narrow the scope of issues and focus more precisely on any topics of disagreement." And Tony writes that this is very interesting because he believes that this is the city letting Scientology know that it's actually prepared to go to court to fight for legal possession of that roadbed, and that Clearwater says it has legal precedent from the Court of Appeals on its side. And so Scientology says it has a 1922 map. So how's this going to go? Well, we're going to find out. But I am personally pretty happy to see some backbone being exhibited by the City Council in Clearwater toward Scientology, in the same way that we are seeing some backbone exhibited here in the UK by the District Council over in Sussex against the Scientologists in the UK in St. Hill over there, right? So this is good news. This is very good news, and the battle continues, and that's kind of what's happening there. So I do not, unfortunately, have Tony here to ask you what kind of sneak previews we may have over this next week. I guess you'll just have to find out by subscribing to Tony's Substack. And of course, if you right now are watching this, and I never say this, and I probably should, if you're not subscribed to this channel, you should do so as well. There is a fantastic amount of information on this YouTube channel about the Church of Scientology and all of its cultic ways, as well as many other cults and cultic extreme activities that people engage in out there, from the Mormons to the Jehovah's Witnesses to the happy, shiny people of the IBLP, the Duggars, and the whole Bill Gothard thing, to many, many, many other cults that I have detailed or interviewed survivors and victims of right here, all for you, all day, every day. All right, so with that, I think I will go ahead and wrap up this live stream. It's been fun to be with you, and I hope that I will see you guys again next week when Tony and I will get back together. This was an anomaly that I am doing the show alone or solo. It is not the intention that we continue it this way. I love partnering up with Tony. So there you go. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.